great news, you're done with your first draft. And that is a huge accomplishment because no matter what happens, no matter how much more editing or revising you have to do, you at least have something to turn in to your teacher on the due date, and that should be a big relief to you. But you're not done yet. There are some steps to make sure that you're turning in your best work, because if you're going to work this hard, you really want to turn in something that is by far your best effort, and it's going to get you the best grade possible. So I'm going to be walking you through some tips on catching errors and improving your writing so that you can feel really good about turning in this essay. The first step in editing your essay is reading it out loud. And this might seem funny to you, but I promise you this, if you can only do one thing to improve your essay, do this. It is the way that more students catch more errors, and it's really easy to do. Simply take your essay and read it out loud. Read it to your family, read it to a friend, read it to your dog. Just make sure that you're reading it out loud, not silently. There is something about reading it silently that lets your eyes just skim over the page, and it's really easy to skip over mistakes. But when you read it out loud, you tend to slow down a little bit and you catch errors. I used to have this happen all the time. I'd ask students to read their essays in front of class, and they would think their essay was ready to go, and they'd stand up in front of their peers and they'd start reading, and they'd realize that they left a little word out here, or they switched 2 words over there, or they spelled something wrong. And even though they had read it a couple times at home, they caught those last couple errors when they read it out loud. And they're usually easy errors, the kind of errors that you don't want to be losing points for when you turn in an essay. So read that essay out loud, and I promise you, you'll catch something that's an easy error, and you can fix it, and your essay is that much better. My next tip for improving your essay: decide if your essay makes sense. Now this is related to the first step, reading it out loud. Hopefully you read your essay to somebody else, your sister, your dad, a friend on the phone. And when you did, ask that person, does my essay make sense? Sometimes you've been writing that essay for a while and you've been thinking about it and wrestling with it, and it makes sense in your head, but it doesn't make sense to somebody else. Because your reader, or your listener, when you read it out loud, probably was not in class with you, and maybe they didn't read the book that you based your essay on. So make sure that the essay makes sense to somebody else. This is especially important for a literature essay, because too many students think that since the teacher assigned the book, and the teacher gave the assignment, and the teacher is the recipient of the essay, well, of course the teacher knows what you're writing about, and so they tend to skip over some of the basics when talking about the book. And they forget to include the title and the author and maybe even the main character's name. And so the essay doesn't make sense to somebody who didn't just finish the book. So in the beginning of your essay, probably in the transition or the thesis statement, if it's a literature essay, make sure you've mentioned the title of the book and the author of the book. And when you mention the main character for the first time, use the main character's full name. One more tip. When you write out the title of a book, remember to italicize it. So if you are writing about maybe a science topic or a history topic, make sure you give enough background at the beginning of your essay that your essay makes sense to someone who hasn't been studying it. My thought is you should be trying to write like a college student, but your essay should make sense to a 5th grader. So try to make sure that you give enough background and definitions so that your reader knows what you're talking about. My third tip for improving your essay: make sure that you have not repeated yourself. As you're reading your essay to yourself or to somebody else, keep track on whether you've repeated something. Have you repeated a fact 2 times in your essay? That isn't going to sound right to your reader. So find one and replace it with a different fact. Have you repeated a word or 2 over and over again? Obviously, if you're writing on a certain topic like George Washington, you'll mention the name Washington over and over. That's natural. But adjectives and verbs and adverbs, you shouldn't be using those over and over again. So if you find that you're repeating things, try to use synonyms. use a different way of saying it. So read your essay out loud to somebody else and listen for things that need to be changed. Make those changes below and then hit next. On the next page, we'll be doing work with more individual sentences and vocabulary.